Welcome to the Farming Chefs channel. As the name says it, we are chefs that farm, and today's episode is all about how we are processing harvests in our kitchen when we have a lot coming in at the same time and how we manage our time. There's a lot coming out of the garden right now. So I've got some courgettes. These are coming by the 10-15 each day, if not more. Then we have our green beans, we've got some sweet corn, we have our first tomatoes coming in, we are absolutely loaded with cucumbers, and we have some other variety of stuff, but not enough to preserve. So we're going to focus on the things that we have plenty of, and the trick really is once you harvest, you want to get everything processed as soon as you can. So that's my tip number one. Don't let things laying around. It's not going to do your produce any good. It's not going to do the quality of your preserves any good. So hurry it up. No procrastinating. The first thing you really want to do is make a time plan. And this can be written down or in your mind, it doesn't matter. But that is something that all professional chefs in all professional kitchens do, is they make time plans for their mise en place. Your mise en place is basically your preparation and you're getting everything ready in order to cook, in our case, to preserve. So what we want to do is basically analyze for each different ingredient what we're going to be doing with it and how long that is going to take, and which actions basically leave us with our hands free to be doing something else. So let's start with the zucchinis. I haven't counted them, but I'm estimating about 20 fresh zucchinis in here. And my plan for them is to dehydrate them into zucchini crisps. This is a great way to store zucchini. You basically can keep them for forever if you air seal the bags. They're also perfect for other kinds of preparations, like frying them afterwards for any kind of garnish. Just a healthy substitute for your basic chips. Then we have our green beans over here. So the best way to process these would first be to take out the string, and then we'll blanch them and freeze them. Another great thing to be doing with them would be canning, for instance. We're not going to be doing that today. Today is going to be freezer fresh frozen, as Gordon Ramsay would say. Thirdly, we have this big pile of sweet corn. They've just been harvested, and sweet corn can be real tricky because the harvesting window is extremely small. So when you have your window, it is of great essence to pick it when it's at that point, because if it's under, it's not sweet enough, and if it's over, all your sugar has turned to starch, meaning you're gonna have a very sticking to your tooth, chewy, starchy experience, not what you put in all the work for. I'm super proud of these small babies. They're not the most beautiful corn we've ever grown, but for the amount of challenges that these plants had to withstand, they came out great. What we'll do with them is we're just going to take away the husk, blanch them, and then basically freeze so we can eat them later. Part of them we'll save to eat fresh because that is really the best way to eat them. If you have kids, this is a great thing to grow. Over here on my left, I have a wealth of cucumbers, and these are very unforgiving. They definitely just deteriorate by the minute after you pick them, and there are only so many raw cucumbers one can eat in a day. So one of my favorite things to do with them is actually to make gazpacho, which is a cold Italian soup, and you need absolutely no heat for this recipe. It's just a matter of blending the right ingredients into a high-powered blender, and also a great way to get rid of your overripe tomatoes. I say overripe, I obviously don't really mean overripe, because if they would be going off, that then would funk up your flavor, so don't do that. But a very juicy, great sweet tomato that just wouldn't make it into a salad tomorrow would be doing great in a gazpacho today. Now that I've identified what I'll be doing with each different vegetable, it is of key importance to understand the timeline in each recipe and identify long periods of time in which you might be able to use your hands elsewhere. For instance, I'll be starting off with my gazpacho first, because that can go straight into the fridge, and I might even be able to have it for lunch by the end of this preparing, hard labor, whatever you want to call it. And then I'll be moving on to my zucchinis, because they also need to be in salt water for multiple hours, meaning that in that time I have my hands free to process these puppies. I'll be moving on to cleaning of my beans, and then I'll be husking or removing the husks of my corn, and then blanching everything. Let's get going. First off, get yourself a cutting board. My first tip would be to identify the container in which you're planning on making the gazpacho. I'm going to be making quite a lot, and I'm going to fill this box with 1/3 of cucumber and 2/3 of ripe tomatoes. First off, let's just put them whole in the box and give them a good wash. I'm selecting on age here, basically seniority takes the cake, so I'm using older cucumbers rather than fresher ones for this recipe, but I am checking that they're not too old, and if they feel spongy, they're gonna have to make their way to the compost. So I've got about 1/3 of cucumber in here. Then I'm going to be moving on to our tomatoes. Any tomato that feels nice and soft to the touch and is dark red will make its way into this recipe today. You can, of course, fill the box slightly heaped. We're going to be blitzing this, so the volume will decrease. And then I'm going to add one paprika, one onion. Red onion is also great. I'm going to be using some garlic, parsley and fresh basil. And then for the seasoning, I have myself a red chili over here. These are not from this year, they're from the freezer from last year's harvest. And then I have some white wine vinegar or apple vinegar, actually also would taste delicious. I've got some pink Himalayan sea salt, very elitist, but any salt will do, just good sea salt basically. And to top it all off, olive oil for this recipe. In this recipe, it is actually quite important to use good olive oil, extra virgin, high quality oil will be best. All our ingredients are here. The herbs have already had a good wash. I'm moving the other stuff to the side, and I'm moving this to the sink where I'm going to give it a quick wash. All right, that is nice and clean. And then we're going to just roughly chop this up and put it all in the plastic box. We get out the old compost bucket. I've got my favorite serrated knife, and I'm just going to now top and tail these cucumbers again. So I'll take off the tops and the tails, and as I do that, I'm just tasting the end. If they're extremely bitter, that's the time to either discard your cucumber or slice it in half, because sometimes the bitterness is only on one side and will stop halfway through. Then I'm going to peel these cucumbers, but not all the way. One yes, one no, one yes, one no. So this is important because the skin of cucumber actually helps you digest cucumber itself. And if you only use cucumbers entirely peeled, that's a little bit heavy on the gut. So we're not going for that. Stripey, fun. Now we'll just quickly take them out so that they are nice and clean on the cutting board. And I'll just roughly, this can be really roughly, chop them up. My high-powered blender will do the hard work here. Chop them back into the box. And then we're moving on to our tomatoes. I'm chopping off the green parts where it was attached to the plant. Once you have a lot of tomatoes growing, you get a little bit spoiled and you get quite rigorous in your cutting. Any of these big white hearts, just cut them out entirely. Once I've removed all the hearts, I'm then going to, again, roughly chop them up. This is not precision work. You just want to make it to the size which your blender will easily feed it down. All right, that was our last tomato. Now we're going to introduce the green pepper. So I'm just going to pop it on its head and again, roughly chopping it up. And as last, our onion. This is a fresh onion and it's not that spicy, so I'm going to be adding in the entire onion. But if you have dried onions at home, you might want to use just half. Depending on how strong your chili is, this is totally to your own liking. And then the last of our cold ingredients is our garlic. Again, this is sort of a seasoning already. So if you like garlic and this is going to be raw, you can add in 2 cloves. If you don't like garlic, just leave it out. And if you're a mild garlic lover, then anything between half a clove and a clove will do. I'm going to put 1.5. Garlic is very healthy, cleanses the blood, so really just add it if you like it. Okay, this can now go into the fridge and we can move on to our next thing. And now we quickly clean here. Moving on to our zucchinis, these are going to need to spend at least 2 to 3 hours in heavily salted water. So the first thing we'll do is we'll prepare that salty mixture. Depending on how much zucchinis you need, you want about 2% brine. Okay, that's dissolved and can be put to the side. Now it's the time to wash the zucchinis. Top and tail. And quite thin strips. These need to be dehydrated. So you don't want to go any thicker than 2-3 millimeters. All right. Now we're going to add in the salt, the water. Mix with the water. And with some very clean hands, we're now just making sure that the salt water is mixed nicely with the fresh water. Make sure that none of these are sticking together. You want the salt water to touch each and every single slice of zucchini here. As we're putting this aside for a few hours. All right, we're halfway there, almost. Now we're moving on to our beans and our corn, and I'm going to ask Philippe to come and help me because those things are just a two-man job. And what we'll be doing is we're going to be topping and tailing the beans, and we're going to be taking the husks of the corn, which is the dirtiest job, so we'll leave that to Philippe. I'm going to start off with the beans. So what we'll start doing is we'll take as many beans as we can simultaneously in one hand, with the part which was attached to the plant all facing the same direction. And then with a sharp knife, so the beans and the corn are ready now. We're going to start with blanching the beans because the water behind me is boiling, and then for the second round of the corn, in the meantime, while we're waiting for that water to come up to a boil a second time, we'll quickly blitz our gazpacho and pop it back in. And then when they're bright green and cooked through, that's about 3 to 5 minutes, depending on the amount of beans you're using and the amount of water. Just make sure that you check before you take them out. You then take them out and pop them into very cold water immediately. These beans are done and they can dry now a little before you pop them in a bag and put them in the freezer. And in the meantime, what we'll do is we'll put another pot of fresh water up behind me for the corn. And while that is coming up to a boil, let's make some gazpacho. Whew, smells delicious. Now we blitz this in 3 batches. All of it together is a little bit too much. So with clean hands, just move this into your mixer. You don't want to load it too full. This is our first batch, and we're just going to put that in another receptacle. Going to the second batch. Each batch is going to have a slightly different color due to the different assembling of amount of tomato and cucumber. That's fine. We're going to mix it all together in the end. So in this last batch, we're going to add all the aromatics. So this is extremely important that we highly over season this batch to basically make up for the fact that these first 2 batches have not been seasoned. And the way we'll do that is by adding a good amount of salt, a tablespoon of salt. Then we're going to add about half a cup of white wine vinegar. Now we'll take our fresh herbs and our olive oil. I'm going to go with, I want to say roughly 2 tablespoons of fresh basil and double that amount of parsley. Parsley will make it more green, so if you're looking for a very red gazpacho, you can hold back on the parsley. Voila. And then we're going to add in the olive oil. Be generous. This is what ties it all together. And then we add the third batch into the rest of it. And then with a mixing spoon, mix the whole thing together. The ultimate taste test, after you've mixed it all together well, and this is very important, give it a little taste. This is for my family, so I'm gonna be just spooning it right in. Délicieux. All right, so it tastes delicious. Let's move it into the plastic container and it can go back into the fridge. A quick clean and then onto our corn. All right, and now let's just quickly back this up while those are still boiling. I like using these recyclable plastic bags. You can't use them forever, but you can use them at least 2 or 3 times if you clean them well and then hang them out to dry. I'm going to batch this up in 3 different bags so that we can just take out what we need for the family. The biggest mistake I see a lot of people making when they bulk preserve is that they do everything in one big plastic bag. And then, well, when you take it out, you'll have to eat it. If you come across one of these lighter green ones, just remove it, because usually this means that this is one bean that has been that's further along in its maturity stage, and they're usually quite dry and stringy. So let me give you a little tip on how I store these beans in bags. Obviously, I'm using a zip tie. I close it off almost entirely, leaving a little hole on the right side. Then I put them down. I shake them like this. Then I gently press out the excess air. Obviously not too hard, you don't want squashed beans. This is not a bean puree. And then I close them off entirely. The reason I do this is because storing them in the freezer like this will give you a lot more storage space. You're welcome. Alright, you want to cook the corn for about 5 to 7 minutes, depending on the thickness of your ears. And then you want to take them out when they're ready and do the same thing as you did with the beans. And that is, as quickly as you can, introduce them into cold water. Down completely, you can then transfer them into the colander where they can dry off before you put them in bags into the freezer. While that corn is drying, let's dehydrate some zucchinis. Let's go to the dehydrator. Okay, and that is how we basically turn a fresh harvest into food that is now available to us in the future. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and any questions or remarks are more than welcome in the comment section below. If you want to check out the full recipe, be sure to go to our website www.thefarmingchefs.com. See you on the next one. The Farming Chefs, peace out.